I took one chapter from this week's parsha that's pretty. It's got a lot in it, and then to switch over to an article by Rabbi Daniel Nevins, who's the dean at JTS. I think he's still the dean. That he writes about in his experience losing his mother and thinking about the traditional, it's not really a greeting per se, the thing that's said, at the cemetery, as well as when leaving a Shiva house, Hamakom Yanachem Eschem, may you be comforted, among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And, the obvious question of how is that comforting? The person just lost the individual family member. Why are you bringing, history into it? But first, in the chapter, it addresses a few different things, including how are we supposed to understand the idea of Jewish chosenness, Jews being chosen, right? That's one that's always difficult for a variety of reasons. Can the rabbis change mitzvot? Can they add mitzvot? Can they cancel mitzvot? And as well as, does our parsha predict the exile from Israel that we mourn on Tisha B'Av? So those were just three themes that I picked up, and we'll see how we go. So this is Devarim 4, Deuteronomy. We started Deuteronomy last week. V'ata Yisrael Shema Elachukim, and now, O Israel, give heed to the laws and rules that I am introducing. We've put it in this library mode, so it's easier to read. Almost there. Give heed to the laws and rules that I am instructing you to observe, so that you may live to enter and occupy the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. Right. So this is part of the whole book of Devarim is its two main themes, which is that it's a repetition, but it's a repetition to prepare for a specific moment of going into the land. So a lot of it is connected to the land. The God of your fathers is giving you. You shall not add anything to what I command you, or take anything away from it, but keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I enjoin upon you. Right? So that seems pretty straightforward. Don't add, don't take away from it. You saw with your own eyes what the Lord did in the matter of Baal Peor, that the Lord your God wiped out from among you every person who followed Baal Peor. Another major theme in Deuteronomy is to resist what was considered the main temptation back then, which was idol worship. While you who held fast to the Lord your God, Chaim Kulchem Hayom, you recognize that, you may, are all alive today. And basically saying those that rejected God and worshipped idols died. See, I have imparted to you laws and rules as the Lord my God has commanded me for you to abide by in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. Observe them faithfully, for that will be proof of your wisdom and discernment to other peoples, who, on hearing of all these laws, will say, surely that great nation is a wise and discerning people. Right, and this speaks to the chosenness, so I'll just read it again. Observe them faithfully, for that will be proof of your wisdom and discernment to other people. So the observing of mitzvot is essentially what makes us special, not necessarily any inherent quality. For what great nation is there that has a God so close at hand as is the Lord our God, whenever we call upon him? Or what great nation has laws and rules as perfect as all this teaching that I set before you this day? But take utmost care and watch yourselves scrupulously, so that you do not forget where am I? Yeah. So that you do not forget the things that you saw with your own eyes, and so that they do not fade from your mind as long as you live, and make them known to your children and to your children's children. Right, and this is pretty straightforward stuff. So you should remember the day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, and that's another name for Mount Sinai, when the Lord said to me, gather the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, in order that they may learn to revere me as long as they live on earth, and may so teach your children. You came forward. This is talking about, at the Sinai experience. You came forward and stood at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was ablaze with flame to the very skies, dark and dense as cloud. The Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but perceived no shape. And that's a whole other chapter we're not going to go into. Nothing but a voice. He declared to you the covenant. And then it goes into not having any other, not making any images. And then let's go to 21. And then Moses talks about, I'm not going into the land, because essentially he blames them. Instead of, saying, I'm not going into the land because I made a mistake, he says, because of you. But again, that's a whole other chapter. And then here, let's go from 23. Take care then not to forget the covenant that the Lord your God concluded with you, and not to make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness, against which the Lord your God has enjoined you. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, an impassioned God. And so that's an interesting image of God. This is kind of the wrathful God image. When you have begotten children and children's children, and are long established in the land, should you act wickedly and make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness, causing the Lord your God displeasure and vexation, I call heaven and earth this day to witness against you, that you shall soon perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. Right? And so he's speaking specifically here about making images, but the message is in general, if you don't follow the mitzvot, then you're going to be kicked out of the land. You shall not long endure in it, but shall be utterly wiped out. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and only a scant few of you shall be left among the nations to which the Lord will drive you. Right? And this is seen as a precursor to the destruction. For those that see the destruction and the exile as a direct punishment from God, this, as well as many other texts, serve that purpose, that this is how God works. This is the deal. This is the covenant. Follow it. You're good. If not, then you lose certainly the main prize, which is the land of Israel, as well as often your life. Not everybody looks at it that way. But I just thought, in terms of connecting the Parsha with Tisha B'Av coming up, that was a link that was worth pointing out. So now I'm going to switch gears to an article I found. As I mentioned before, this is. Hold on, I have to share this tab instead. And make it bigger. All right. By Rabbi Nevins, the dean of JTS. I'm guessing he wasn't the dean at the time, because otherwise it would probably say that. And maybe we'll just trade off doing some reading here, just so you don't get sick of hearing my voice. Does anybody want to take a couple of paragraphs?
I will. It's Ruth. Good morning.
Good morning.
Stepping back from the grave of my mother, I accepted words that I have often offered to others. Hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch sha'ar avelai. I don't know. I could really Hebrew better than this. May God, literally the place, comfort you among the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem.
Right. So just to explain what he means by literally the place, hamakom, the word hamakom, if you translate it literally, it means may the place comfort you, which sounds kind of strange until you understand that that is one way to refer to God.
Over the course of Shiva, as this curious statement was repeated, I began to wonder about its origins. I knew that it wasn't a biblical verse, nor was the expression found in the Talmud or Midrash. A comprehensive search revealed that this common expression of comfort is not found even in medieval codes or commentaries. Reference books on mourning rituals such as Gesher HaChaim and Kol Boel Avelut do not address its origins. Rabbi Shmuel Glick traces the development of bereavement customs from Talmudic until modern times.
The few discussions of our phrases in rabbinic literature have addressed a technical problem with this practice. Following the example set by Job, Jewish law forbids one to speak to a mourner until he or she opens conversation. This allows the mourner to set the tone for the visit and prevents visitors from rushing to fill the painful silence with inappropriate patter. Yet, Jewish custom encourages us to offer this standard expression already as the mourners file between us at the grave. Why? Right? If this is meant to be a comfort, then we already taught that we're not supposed to lead with the comfort. We're supposed to respond. One unsatisfying answer is that the very act of walking away from the grave between two lines of friends may be viewed as an act of dialogue initiated by the mourner, thereby liberating his friends to start engaging him with words of comfort. Right? So he is setting, or he or she is setting the tone by walking through, essentially saying, inviting others to comfort them. Yet Rabbi Moshe Feinstein argues that walking from the grave is not a statement, nor is our expression the substance of comforting the bereaved, any more than it is the Talmudic era, may you be comforted from heaven. Right? And my understanding of this is if everybody's doing it, this is the tradition, and everybody, assuming there are people to do it, you have they make the two lines and people walk in between. If that's just standard practice, then the person is not actually setting any tone whatsoever. They're just following along. So they didn't invite the comfort. And then Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who's a great halachic decisor, in other words, he made many halachic rulings in modern times, says that even that expression that we generally seen as comfort would not qualify for the mitzvah of comforting a mourner. Rabbi Feinstein states that none of these formulae fulfill the mitzvah of nichum avelim, comforting the mourner. That mitzvah requires patience, to wait for the mourner to break the silence and only then to speak to the heart until his spirit is stilled. In the expression Hamakom Yanachem Eschem, if the expression Hamakom Yanachem Eschem is not even fulfillment of the mitzvah of comforting the bereaved, then why do we offer it? One possibility is the power of the opening appellation for God, Hamakom, the place. Jeremiah 13:17 makes an opaque statement that there is a hidden place of weeping due to the pride of Israel. In Talmud Chagiga 5b, and these are some of the texts that I'm going to be using in the class on Thursday. Where Shmuel ben Inya explains in the name of Rav that this is a hidden place within God. Shmuel bar Yitzchak adds that there is weeping in this place over the lost glory of Israel. Right? This is a fascinating concept, that God is crying, and what that means, what that looks like, and then to say that there's different parts of God. As in the Talmudic discussion there, they try to reconcile where one says that God doesn't cry and the other one says, well, it's like the inner part cries, the outer part, what's the inner part, what's the outer part? Anyway, in a recent response, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg expands this thought, saying that hidden within God is a place of sorrow for the suffering and dispersion of the people of Israel. Right? So it's almost like we're compartmentalizing God here. But in terms of the theme of Tisha B'Av, it's this idea that the Jews being expelled from Israel was and to some degree still is such a terrible thing and so against God's plan that God is in mourning. Only when the exiles return and the pride of Israel is restored will God be comforted. Right? And of course, there's the whole debate of how do we address these things now when we, to some degree, have some autonomy, at least in Israel. These things were often seen as either all or nothing. Either we had control or we didn't. The idea of having some but not all is, and it being secular control as opposed to religious, has led to a lot of debate. Rabbi Michael Garrett suggests that Yenachem could plausibly be read as a passive nifal, like to fall, and etchem could be vocalized itchem, yielding. God shall be comforted together with you among the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. If you need, when people have other people experiencing the same thing that they do, it already gives comfort. And when you think that God is actually mourning as well, that can be a big comfort as well. As it were, God projects a joyous exterior, yet within God shares fully in the pain of Israel and refuses to be comforted until the time of redemption. In a similar fashion, the mourner harbors a secret place of sorrow in the heart, even when presenting a happy exterior to the world. All right. Anyway, we'll go from there. I'm going to skip the whole theological discussion of Hamakom and go to the mourners of Zion, because that's the connection with Tisha B'Av. I have to find it. Here we go. Now, who are they? Now, who are these mourners of Zion and Jerusalem? Isaiah mentions them almost as if they are an organized group. Indeed, later in Jewish history, there emerged groups of mourners identified as Avelei Tzion. They were known as the mourners of Zion. After the Second Temple was destroyed, pious Jews would engage in excessive fasting in order to demonstrate their yearning for the restoration of Zion. Throughout the Middle Ages, there were Jewish groups in Jerusalem and across the diaspora who established ascetic societies of mourners. This stance was controversial, since the Talmud warns mourners not to grieve excessively. But they saw this as different, that it wasn't, just mourning for an individual, it was mourning for, the whole Jewish people. Moreover, some of these ascetics were apparently Karaites. Still, the practice persisted. There is a note of defensiveness in the 9th century Midrash Psikta Rabati that explains that only because of the unending prayers and fasting of the mourners of Zion will the Messiah appear. Right? And so we get this mixed message. On the one hand, it's like, guys, you're not living in the real world here. And then you see something like this, that it's only because of them that we would be redeemed. This midrash may reflect the pressure felt by Avelei Tzion to moderate their mourning for the destruction of the temple. Like Jacob, they refused to be comforted, even as others encouraged them to acclimate to the new reality. In the special version of Birkat HaMazon, said in a Shiva house, we alter the paragraph, rebuild Jerusalem, with an extended description of the mourners of Zion. Either these people who felt the national calamity so intensely came to be viewed as role models of what an ordinary mourner should experience, or perhaps our phrase developed as a warning to the mourners not to become like the mourners of Zion, a group that grieved obsessively over the ancient destruction of Jerusalem. Jewish law viewed excessive mourning for the dead as unhealthy. Mourners returning from the cemetery are required to eat a sudat havra, revival meal and to avoid the cemetery during the week of Shiva. Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rav, warns not to mourn excessively. 3 days were considered appropriate for intensive weeping, 7 for eulogizing, and 30 for external signs of grief, such as not grooming or ironing clothes. So you can read the rest of it on your own, and there's certainly more interesting parts. But the Talmud talks about these mourners of Zion to the point where some of them said, you know what, I'm not getting married. I'm not having children. I'm not, they would put all kinds of restrictions on themselves and say, this is not okay. This is until our world as we know it is restored. We're not going on. And, it's, I think at different points in history, people have felt that way. But as we see, the rabbis were ambivalent around it. On the one hand, they admired it because it showed that deep connection. On the other hand, they were afraid of it because if the people don't get married and don't have children, it doesn't continue. So switching gears a little bit towards, let's see, where is it? So many documents here. Here we go. It's towards Tisha B'Av. And this is some of the notes I'm working on for the class on Thursday. So Tisha B'Av is known primarily for the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem. But theologically, there's also this idea that the day was already chosen before the destruction of the temple as a day of mourning. There's reference to the spies, and there's also the expression that when we're back in Israel and redeemed, that it's going to be switched from a fast day to a holiday. So here's just a short list of some of the things that are said to have happened on Tisha B'Av or the day before or the day after. First Crusade officially commenced on August 15th, 1096, killing 10,000 or so Jews. Actually, let me go back to that Mishnah. Here we go. There were 5 events that happened to our ancestors on the 17th of Tammuz and 5 on the 9th of Av. On the 17th of Tammuz, the tablets were shattered, the Tamid, daily offering, was canceled, the walls of the city were breached, and Apostamos burned the Torah and placed an idol in the temple. On the 9th of Av, it was decreed that our ancestors should not enter the land. Right, so that's the story with the spies. The temple was destroyed the first and the second time. Beitar was captured, and the city was plowed up. When Av enters, they limit their rejoicing. So Beitar being captured is the culmination of the Bar Kokhba revolt, and it was the 3rd revolt against the Romans, in which at least 500,000, more likely 1 million or more people died. Beitar was just kind of the last stand. So it's, there's people see a lot of significance in the fact that it also happened around Tisha B'Av. Let's see. The Jews were expelled from England. Jews were expelled from France, Spain. World War I started. which ultimately led to the Holocaust. Himmler formally received approval for the Nazi Party, the final solution. And so there's also, Tisha B'Av is also another day for commemorating the Holocaust. Warsaw Ghetto and Treblinka, the bombing in Argentina, the Jewish center there, and the Israeli disengagement from Gaza, from Gush Katif. That was also, it's interesting that this was included because this was actually, the Israeli government did this as a peace offering, as opposed to all the other things are kind of outsiders doing it to us, but they managed to get it in there. This list is, I copied it from Wikipedia. It's based on Or Sameach. Let's see. So on Tisha B'Av, we do the prayers as well as Eicha, Lamentations, which is part of the, the canonical Torah, the broader Torah, as well as Kinot, which are kind of like piyutim, the same way we have, on the high holidays. One of the more interesting and devastating ones is written by Rabbi Meir of Rottenburg. You may remember him that he was the one who was really against women putting on tefillin and that sort of thing. But he also was someone who witnessed the burning of 24 chariots of the Talmud and other holy books. And he wrote a piyut. Which I have over here. And thankfully somebody in opensiddur.org translated it into German and English. Question. Burnt in the fire, about the well-being of the mourners who long to live in the courtyard of your holy abode, who languish in the dust of the earth and suffer, who are disturbed by the burning of your scrolls. They are darkened without a glimmer and hope for daylight to shine upon them and you. About the well-being of the groaning man who cries, broken-hearted, constantly lamenting the pangs of your wounds. The lament rising like jackals, ostriches, and calling in bitter mourning for you. How can that which was given in consuming fire be consumed by earthly fire? And the strangers were not burnt by your flames. Right? And so a common thing that we see in the Lamentations and in the keynotes is people struggling to make sense with how this fits in with the bigger plan, with the idea of a compassionate God, with the idea of chosenness, and there's expressions of frustration of it seems no matter what we did so bad, this seems to be disproportionate, and other times you see parts of it that say we accept it, it's our sins, we failed, and these are the consequences. And so it's a sort of push and pull. I was thinking of it in terms of the stages of grief, the famous stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And just in terms of a model, and it's kind of like stages of, it's not all that different actually, but it's there are times that we are either resigned or accept our fate, and there are other times that we really kind of try to make sense. And so traditionally, you don't learn Torah on Tisha B'Av, just like you wouldn't right after the passing of a close family member. But the exception is that you are allowed to learn about the destruction. So books like Jeremiah, the book of Job, for instance, are traditionally, in some Sephardic synagogues, they actually read the book of Job in the morning. And discussion about it. So let me see if there's anything else I want to include here. I mentioned, so Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was sitting and teaching, and he did some trash talking, as they say, in modern times, about the Romans. Let me find it. Oh, I don't know what just happened. Never mind. I ended up on the Department of Transportation here. And there was somebody there in the room who heard him, went to the Romans, told them about it. And so the Romans came after him. So he, went into hiding. And then he got afraid that his hiding place wasn't good enough. So he went into deeper hiding. And he was in a cave for 12 years. And when he came out, and he had studied so much Torah and had such insight that he was so powerful that he just looked at things. He got upset because he saw Jews not observing the mitzvahs. He looked at things and he zapped them. Anyway, the story goes on, but the cruelty of the Romans is abundantly clear in these stories. Whether it was initially whether they had issues with this or not, because in this story, one of the students went and told the Romans. There's also the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story where somebody went, because they were upset with how they were treated by other Jews, they went and told the Romans. What we do know is that there was a Roman emperor, Julian, who my nephew is named after, who actually was compassionate to the Jews and tried to rebuild the temple. It would have been the third temple. And there's debate about what happened and why that didn't succeed. But that whole chapter of our relationship with the Romans, the Babylonians, the different countries and the ones who ruled is a complicated one because often it was internal fighting that spilled over, and whether they hated us before or they saw an opportunity, we ended up in a lot of trouble. So that's what I have for today. And please tune in on Thursday. Any questions or comments?
Rabbi Shelley?
Hey, Shelley.
So I was just thinking that by virtue of the work that you do, you're uniquely equipped to comment on the value of mourning, on how it helps, and perhaps as part of your Tisha B'Av talk, you might react to it right now.
Yeah, I can certainly think about what to include, and thank you. Probably the most powerful and important thing for me that I've learned is that people mourn so differently. It mentioned in that article, about God having joy on the outside but still weeping on the inside. And some people can access their emotions immediately, and sometimes, it's accessed so much that they get overwhelmed by it, and other people can't access it until some other time when they don't even realize what hit them, and all of a sudden they get a tsunami of grief. And I think, it's a reflection of the literature that, for some people, the destruction, it was it. There is nothing else, especially for the Sadducees. To them, it was without a temple, without this way of life. There's no adapting to synagogues, to davening, and that's all nice, but that's not what we do. So I think it's reflective of I've seen families where I've been there either when the person died or after, where there's shrieking and there's all of that, and then I've been with people who are cool, calm, and collected, joking around. And the temptation is to say that, the first case are people who were really close to that person, and the second case are people who are just didn't have a very good relationship with them, so they don't really care that that the person died. I don't believe that that's always the case.
Well, Rabbi, I'm sorry, it's Arlene.
Okay.
Isn't our whole period of Shiva and then being an Ovel and everything else all part of the process to get us back into normalcy? I mean, first, the initial 7 days of Shiva where you have family and close friends around you. So you really don't, there's constantly, people around you. And then after the 7 days, you get, a little bit more back into normalcy, but still you're a mourner. So you still, then the 30-day period, then the 11-month period. So isn't that all, part of allowing us to get...
Absolutely. The question, so that's on a personal loss. The question becomes when it's a national loss, and it goes back to that whole thing about Judaism being, a religion, a nationality, a people, And so for some people, this was not, they saw a very strong distinction between what happened on Tisha B'Av, especially, with the razing of Jerusalem, and, then the Romans, to add insult to injury, they started building a different city with a different name on top of the ruins of Jerusalem. And to them, this, it was cataclysmic, it was just the end of the world. So okay, if you lose a family member, you grieve. Obviously that's not the case, but to them this didn't fit into the same category.
Yes, you call.
Absolutely.
Rabbi, just could you clarify what you meant by the class on Thursday? What time are we talking about?
2:00. I'll post it on Facebook. It was in the email that went out. There's a flyer.
Because I know about Wednesday evening is 8:15.
That's right. That as well.
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah. So
it's Wednesday 15. Yeah.
Yeah. So Wednesday evening 8:15, and that's where we're going to have 4 congregations together. And even though I tried to limit it, they wanted to have all 4 rabbis say something. So each rabbi will speak for a little bit, assuming that one rabbi doesn't speak for too long. And then, but I'm going to push to make sure that we start latest at 9, because it's late. And then in addition to that, as part of the Esther Grushkin lecture series, they're having a program in the afternoon with different rabbis from across the denominational spectrum with different topics. And I think Rabbi Sussman is actually if I remember correctly, Rabbi Sussman is going to talk about the book burning episode, and that was in Paris.
So, are we still having Thursday evening services?
I suppose we should.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Rabbi, is there a lesson to be learned for the Jewish people about Tisha B'Av as far as from a military and from a Jewish people's perspective? Today, there are 14 million Jews in the world, and we are as divided as we were in 70 AD. And perhaps that's why the Romans were able to win, because the Jews were killing more Jews than Romans were killing Jews.
Yeah. I don't know if we're as divided, but we're certainly pretty heavily divided. And I think it's a really just like there was the rabbis were ambivalent about just how much to stay in mourning. They were also ambivalent, after the first revolt, the second revolt, the third revolt. They were like, that's it, it's not happening. So let's, even though, Israel put up a strong fight, the Romans were just much bigger. And so there's a push and pull between, focusing on security versus focusing on faith. But there's a fascinating piece in the Talmud, which I think I have in my source sheet here for Thursday, which talks about a debate between the rabbis in a case where somebody went, the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story, so it's a continuation of it, where basically to cut out the whole story for right now, they were faced with a dilemma whether or not to sacrifice a blemished animal that the Romans had offered as a sacrifice. And some people said, what are you, Meshuggah? You want to start a war over here? Just sacrifice it and get it over with. And others said, no, if the slippery slope, we can't do it. Otherwise, people are going to think that you can bring blemished animals for sacrifices. And then, I don't remember which rabbi, but one of them basically laments, and in this really kind of bitter way, you guys are going to get us all killed, and he was right.
But obviously today the Israeli military uses the revolt of 70 AD and the revolt of 135 AD, the Bar Kokhba revolt, as an example of what not to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback or a Tuesday morning quarterback, I guess.
Of course.
So there were a lot of different things that were done in those revolts. It's not like there was a simple playbook that you can kind of say, this is they went, to the right side, we go to the left side. There were those that went to the right and those that went to the left. It's a very, and trying to reconstruct it from the sources, it's a mess. So but I get, obviously, we want to be able to protect ourselves, and that's really, important. Anyway, this is an ongoing discussion that we could have.
Yes.
All right, guys. Have a good week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I'm curious who Sakulik is.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure.